Hi everybody, today we have Jeremy Williams, my favorite arborist. Well, my son is an arborist, so I shouldn't say that. My favorite Northwest Arkansas arborist. And I want Jeremy to introduce himself and briefly tell you why you need an arborist. Take it away, Jeremy.
All right, so, my name is Jeremy Williams. I'm an ISA board certified master arborist, owner of Tree Climbers LLC, ISA board certified master arborist, ISA climber specialist, consulting arborist through the National Society of Consulting Arborists, plant applicator, tree risk assessor. So enough about me.
Et cetera, et cetera.
I've done this for a minute.
He's overqualified, in other words.
So why you need an arborist is someone who is studied in the biology of trees, why a tree is growing the way it is, what is normal for a tree. So what's normal for one tree is not going to be normal for another. So an arborist by dictionary definition is someone who studies and works with trees. That could be someone who's very qualified, someone who is not qualified at all and just picked up a chainsaw, could classify them as an arborist.
We see a lot of that.
Having someone who is dedicated their life to studying trees is very important for understanding why the tree's growing, the forward trajectory of the tree. That's where the arborist comes into play. If you just need a tree cut down, a tree guy could do that depending on their skill qualifications. But as far as caring for a tree, making sure a tree is going to be pruned properly, that's where an arborist really comes into play.
And we want to be careful when we trim trees. So if you just call some guy with a chainsaw, he might kill your tree. There's a very good possibility he'll kill your tree, whereas Jeremy can prune it and do a good job and make sure it doesn't die, because let's face it, trees are very, very expensive. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about something that always kind of bothered me, and that is the way how the trees are trimmed for power lines. So, Jeremy, talk to us about what you need to watch for. How far back should the tree really be from the power lines?
Really depends on the overall size of the tree when it gets mature.
Okay.
The old adage, right tree, right place, doesn't ring any more true than in this situation. So if it's a dogwood, you could probably plant that right underneath the power lines just because they're not going to get tall enough. If you've got a pin oak, you probably need to plant it 30, 40 feet away. As it grows up, it's going to reach towards the lines. A little bit of pruning for the lines is not going to be an issue. If you're planting a large specimen tree pretty close to the line, within 20, 30 feet of the lines, a good portion of that tree's canopy is going to have to be removed, just because
really, really bad for a tree, right?
it is incredibly bad.
Yeah,
but
so
it's easy for people to fault the power company because they're the ones that do the work. But really, the actual root of the issue is where the tree was planted, because they have a federal mandate. They have to keep the lines clear because everyone wants their power on.
Right.
And so they're stuck in between a rock and a hard place.
Now, you were talking about in the future needing to trim this where the two vertical main shoots are coming off.
Yes.
Instead of having one leader, this guy is developing two.
Right.
When is the best time of year to do pruning?
As far as, it really depends on what you're doing, what the overall shape of the tree is, where it's at. Generally speaking, wintertime is the best time.
Okay.
If you're going to be pruning live branches. The reason for that is the tree, as it goes dormant, will store most of its carbohydrates in the root system.
Gotcha.
So as you cut those branches off, you're cutting less of its stored energy reserves.
Okay.
If you cut it during the summer, it will be losing more of those. If you need something where you're wanting longer interim between pruning, like except next to a house, pruning during the summer would actually be better because it doesn't grow back quite as fast. In a situation like this, wintertime would be the best. The main number one thing on pruning is try to avoid heavy pruning during a drought period. That's the number one thing. Yes.
Okay, Jeremy, you've got us between two trees.
Yes.
A giant, whatever that is, blackjack
So
oak?
that's a pin oak.
A giant pin oak.
And a magnolia and a sycamore.
And then right here we have a giant magnolia. I would say these trees are over 100 years old.
I would say this magnolia is probably
Oh. Oh gosh, I thought they were much older than that.
These are all fairly fast growing trees with the exception of the magnolia.
Okay.
So the pin oaks are the fastest growing oak we have in Northwest Arkansas by a significant margin.
Wow.
So all three of these trees are trees that need full light, more open exposure. They can grow in a forest environment, but not their native habitat.
Gotcha.
And so if you look here, we've got the sycamore, or the sycamore over there, the magnolia, the pin oak. This magnolia probably was here first.
Gotcha.
Then these other trees were planted or sprouted, whichever happened. So as they grew a lot faster than the magnolia. So now the magnolia is becoming crowded.
Absolutely.
And so it's not doing, it's doing okay, but it's not thriving.
Right.
So that's another thing as far as looking at how big the tree's actually going to get. I usually tell people, look at what the nursery says on the label and then add 20% to that.
Oh, really?
And because a lot of times that's kind of an average. There's always outliers to the average.
Right.
And that's why, like magnolias, they generally, I don't know the number right offhand, but I would say they're probably going to say 30 to 40 feet, maybe 50. This one is getting crowded, so now this tree is more like 50, 55 feet.
Gotcha. So it's growing vertically to compensate for the light.
Exactly.
Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about mulching.
Yes.
Which I have struggled with. Obviously.
So mulch and water kind of go hand in hand. So watering is probably the number one thing as far as keeping a new tree alive.
Mm-hmm.
Not too much water, not too little water. You can die by dehydration and you can die by drowning.
Okay.
Trees are the same way. So whenever you're watering a tree, you want to let the ground or the soil dry out between waterings.
Okay.
The reason for that is soil holds water, minerals, and oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
People a lot of times don't think about oxygen in soil, but that's a critical portion of soil makeup. The roots have to have oxygen to survive.
And on that note, if I could interrupt you for just a second, that is exactly why I didn't put cardboard and heavy mulch and all that down under
these trees, because I didn't want to deprive them of oxygen. So I just put straw, and as a result, I have Bermuda grass all up in my permaculture experiment. So just saying.
Okay. So the roots will find a sweet spot based on the environment that they are in, if they're in that environment for long enough, to where they're deep enough to have a consistent source of water in normal conditions, but then high enough that they're going to get enough oxygen. So most of the roots in Northwest Arkansas, based on our soil makeup, are going to be in this about 4-inch band.
That's all?
That's about it.
Wow.
And it's going to be, usually it starts around 6 inches deep down to about 12, somewhere in that 4 to 12 inch deep range is where 80-90% of the roots are going to be hanging out.
Interesting.
So if you add too much mulch, then the roots are suffocating, not enough oxygen, so the tree's going to start sending up roots higher and higher and higher.
Exactly, and then you run into
drought issues, or more susceptible to drought.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a mulch ring, which we don't have here, you did a good job on that.
Yeah.
What happens is those roots start growing up into that new mulch, hit the edge of that mulch, and then they have to start circling. 10 years down the road, the tree has choked itself to death. A little is good, a lot is bad.
Okay.
So
how many
around
inches?
3 inches, 2 to 3 inches is kind of the sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
Just it's important to understand why we mulch.
Mm-hmm.
It's more important mulching younger trees versus older trees,
Gotcha.
because mulch adds biologic matter to the soil.
Mm-hmm.
It also helps conserve moisture.
Mm-hmm.
And so you want that on new trees, because new trees have very tiny root systems. A lot of their roots were cut during the transplanting process. Just it's a stressful time for them. Mm-hmm. So adding mulch adds that a lot of benefits, but too much, you end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Right, exactly. So I don't even bother mulching the mature trees, because I figured the roots were deep enough. It was getting water from, deeper under the soil. I wasn't aware that the roots were so shallow. I am not even watering these trees anymore, these fruit trees.
Usually the first 3 years is the most critical to water trees when they're newly planted.
Mm-hmm.
That first year obviously is the most critical. And so the general rule of thumb for bigger trees is if we get an inch of rain a week during the growing season, you're good.
Okay.
That is not necessary.
And the growing season is from
the time the leaves come off to the leaves come off.
Okay.
Or we start kind of getting that first frost.
Okay, gotcha.
So Jeremy, I thank you for coming out, but I just wanted to kind of review.
Yes.
This is November. From now until the leaves start to emerge in spring, it's
Yes.
okay to plant a tree. This
Absolutely.
is the
So
prime time.
the prime time for planting is about the time the temperatures start cooling off. We start getting our fall rains. I call that the start of fall.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there till some point in April in our climate where the leaves have come out, but before it's getting really hot, give the tree at least a month or two of the good fall rain or spring rain, sorry, to get a little bit established before the heat of June comes.
Gotcha. Is there anything else that we could be doing at this time of year to help our trees?
Just take a look at them. Just see,
watch them.
look for those structural defects that we saw. It's a good time when you're not in the garden as much to read up on common issues with your trees.
Take a look at your trees in winter, right? And if you see something anomalous, or you see something
Weird
on the
or you saw
bark,
something. More importantly, what did you see anything weird last year?
I see. Anything else in the
Joy.
winter? All right. Well, thanks so much for coming. I
You're
appreciate
welcome.
it, and
Thank
we
you.
will see you again next quarter.
Yeah.